My mother-in-law, a professional matchmaker, died a gruesome, sudden death. Her teeth and eyes were gone, her face horribly twisted and distorted. Without proper mourning, they hastily buried her that very night. But along the funeral procession, shoes began to fall, one by one, scattered along the path. Upon hearing that my mother-in-law was on her deathbed, my husband, Ethan, and I rushed back home in the dead of night. As we reached the doorway, Ethan was stopped. They claimed his birth year clashed with the deceased, fearing malevolent spirits, so only I was allowed to see her one last time. But truth be told, my mother-in-law and I had only met twice. We weren't close at all. Why let me in? Ethan's face was etched with pain. Anya, please go in for me and see mother one last time. He quickly draped funeral attire over me, tied a straw rope around my waist, and pushed me inside. Such were the customs in his hometown. A death was a momentous event. I could only muster my courage and step in. The moment I entered, I saw my mother-in-law, already dressed in a burial shroud, lying still in the main hall. Her eye sockets were deeply sunken, her lips tightly pressed, utterly devoid of breath. She was dead. I was so terrified I wanted to retreat, but the person overseeing the burial preparations saw me and grabbed my arm. "You are Ethan's wife, aren't you? Come, place the coin to seal her tongue for your mother-in-law." Before I could react, she shoved a copper coin into my hand. "I'll pry her mouth open, you just need to put it in." As she pried open my mother-in-law's mouth, a thick, foul-smelling, murky gas wafted out. They say the last breath of the deceased is tainted, and touching it brings misfortune. I quickly held my breath and turned my face away. From the corner of my eye, I still saw that all of my mother-in-law's teeth had fallen out, leaving only dark red gums. Her lips were deeply sunken, and even the large mole at the corner of her mouth, the one she proudly called her matchmaker's mole, was almost completely concave. "Hurry, hurry, you who mourn without desire." Trembling with fear, I stuffed the coin into my mother-in-law's mouth, pushing it deep with my finger before quickly withdrawing my hand and backing away several steps. The person supervising the burial immediately closed my mother-in-law's mouth and chanted in a high-pitched voice, "Daughter-in-law casts money to seal the tongue, to the yellow springs, speak no more." Then, she lifted my mother-in-law's eyelids and inserted 2 artificial eyes. "With eyes and pupils, open your eyes and walk the path of reincarnation." As she lifted the eyelids, I was horrified to see my mother-in-law's eye sockets completely empty. The moment the artificial eyes were inserted, a thick stream of black blood flowed out, accompanied by a strange gurgling sound. Terrified, I ran towards the door, but Ethan blocked me, signaling me to stay silent. The air was suffocatingly heavy and tense. I dared not ask anything, much less look closely. Only when the officiant declared, "The embalming is complete, the daughter-in-law prepares to inter," did I feel a slight ease. My husband was the only son, so there was no one else to be called a dutiful daughter-in-law. He wore a mask and carried the body on his back, while I stood beside him, helping to guide it into the coffin. But strangely, beneath my mother-in-law's burial shroud, her 2 shoes were mismatched. One was a funeral shoe, the other an everyday leather shoe, its heels still nailed in place. More disturbingly, when she was placed in the coffin, her body was positioned face down, a practice called *fu shen zhang*, meaning the deceased bows to atone for sins, severing yin and yang energies and suppressing the soul. My mother-in-law's sudden, tragic death was suspicious enough, but to be buried in such a bizarre manner? What exactly was going on? I tugged at Ethan's sleeve, wanting to ask, but he merely shook his head. "Stay quiet, don't speak." After the body was covered with the shroud, an old Daoist priest immediately stepped in. "Your mother-in-law passed away at an inauspicious and clashing hour. She must be taken to the mountain and buried tonight. Moreover, she died with missing teeth and eyes, only a faint breath remaining to seek a replacement. Close relatives must avoid the malevolent energy. We need to find a suitable person to guard the spirit altar and burn paper offerings." Close relatives, of course, meant my husband, but he was forbidden. So wouldn't my father-in-law go? But when I turned, everyone was looking at me. My father-in-law had been with her all day, so he was also considered a close relative. I instinctively wanted to refuse, but Ethan gripped my hand, his eyes bloodshot. "Anya, just for half the night. The funeral procession will depart at midnight. I beg you." He even intended to kneel before everyone. I quickly helped him up, but before I could, my father-in-law pulled him up, glancing at me with deep dissatisfaction. I wanted to argue, but Ethan pushed his father away, continuing to plead with me. Under everyone's gazes, I finally nodded in agreement. Only half a day and an extra night it wouldn't be too long. Although Ethan and my father-in-law had to avoid the malevolent energy, there were still people moving about in the hall of mourning. I tried to ask several times how my mother-in-law died, but Ethan said he didn't know either. My father-in-law was busy with funeral preparations and nowhere to be seen. The old Daoist priest had already begun to set up the altar. I had to follow along, burning paper offerings, lighting incense, circling the coffin, pouring wine until my head spun. By late afternoon, the old Daoist priest left to eat, instructing me not to let the incense burn out. If the incense extinguishes, the descendants will be cut off and good fortune will vanish. I could only sit stubbornly in the hazy smoke, slowly burning paper offerings. Half-consciously, I heard the sound of children playing with firecrackers outside. Matchmaker, matchmaker, blind and reckless. Eyes gouged, teeth gone, nothing left to say. Matchmaker, matchmaker, running east and west. Rotten feet shedding shoes, descendants cut off, family ruined. Some were older, some younger, but all were barefoot, running and jumping cheerfully. As if sensing my gaze, every child turned to look at me and smiled. The first verse of the rhyme perfectly described how my mother-in-law died, the second must be a curse. These children were all from the village, surely they knew the reason for my mother-in-law's death. I quickly stood up, wanting to go ask, but stood too fast, my vision blurred, and I stumbled forward. A hand beside me caught me. I turned to see a young man in Daoist robes, his face somber, looking outside. Tonight, during the funeral, if anyone drops a shoe, do not pick it up. Who would drop a shoe? Before I could ask, my father-in-law's angry shouts rang out from the yard, and the children scattered. When I looked again, the Daoist priest had also vanished. My heart grew even more anxious. Someone came to take over burning paper offerings, and I used the opportunity to eat and call my husband. But he was busy and didn't answer. When I asked others, they said he had gone to invite elders or buy supplies. I finally managed to reach him. He was talking to someone else, only hurriedly comforting me. The funeral procession leaves at 11 p.m. Please bear with it a little longer, okay? With that, he hung up immediately. I hadn't even had a chance to ask anything. I wanted to find the children again to ask about what happened, but a glance around the yard revealed no one. Seeing me looking around, people urged me to go back and burn offerings, so I reluctantly returned. The sun was setting, a blood-red twilight pouring in, illuminating the black-painted coffin. Because it had been bought hastily, the paint was still wet, dripping onto the ground like thick black blood. I shivered with fear, calling Ethan again and again, but couldn't reach him. On the day of the funeral, he had to host guests, dig the grave, and hire pallbearers, so he had no time to answer the phone. I could only stare at the clock, wishing time would pass quickly. Finally, night fell. More and more people came to pay their respects. Almost the entire village was present. It seemed my mother-in-law was well-liked. The hall of mourning buzzed with activity, and I felt less afraid. At 11 p.m., the coffin lid was about to be closed, preparing for the procession. Since my husband had to avoid the malevolent energy, I was the one to hammer in the nails of the coffin lid. Once done, yin and yang were separated. Ethan could carry the ancestral tablet, and I only needed to carry a wreath behind him. As I bent down to pick up the wreath, the young man in Daoist robes suddenly appeared behind me, pressing a rooster into my hand. Hold it tight, don't let go. If it crows, immediately turn and run. Understand? Seeing his Daoist robes and recalling my mother-in-law's bizarre death, I quickly nodded. He suddenly squeezed the rooster's comb hard, tearing a piece off, and opened his mouth. Huh, I was confused. He then shoved the bloody piece of comb into my mouth. Bite down hard, don't swallow, don't spit. From now on, no matter who calls, absolutely do not answer. A salty, metallic taste spread through my mouth. The rooster, its comb torn and bleeding, merely trembled in my hand, not uttering a sound. Bloody comb, strong yang energy, used to ward off evil. Clearly, this Daoist knew something was amiss tonight. The front of the procession began to shout, "Start the funeral procession?" Firecrackers exploded loudly. 8 pallbearers chanted in unison, ropes creaking, but the coffin remained stubbornly heavy, refusing to be lifted. My father-in-law's face was ashen. He pressed an envelope into the Daoist priest's hand, who then slapped the coffin hard. Taking advantage of the moment, my father-in-law threw several massive firecrackers under the coffin. Amidst the booming explosions, the 8 pallbearers simultaneously lifted, nearly overturning the coffin, and finally set off. They say my mother-in-law died an unnatural death, so she must be buried beneath the temple of the Holy Mother who grants children, upstream of the river, to beg for her blessing, for forgiveness, and also to conveniently ask for children for the whole village. I held the rooster comb in my mouth, one hand clutching the trembling rooster, the other carrying the wreath at the end of the procession. The late-night funeral procession was chilling. For some reason, I kept hearing a wailing sound, like someone crying beside the coffin. The villagers walking behind kept turning to look at me, whispering softly. With blood in my mouth, I couldn't speak, and I didn't fully understand the local dialect, so I just kept my head down and walked. The path to the grave followed the river embankment, with no streetlights, only a few people shining flashlights. As we turned onto the embankment, I suddenly saw a black high-heeled shoe by the roadside. It stood upright, its heels seemingly stuck in the mud. I unconsciously looked up to see who had dropped it, but everyone in the procession was wearing funeral attire. No one wore high heels. Remembering the Daoist priest's warning, I pretended not to see it. A few more steps, and I saw a pink child's shoe. A small, fluffy pom-pom on its toe still swayed. A faint scent of milk hung in the air. Normally, carrying children on a journey often leads to dropped shoes. But who would dare carry a child to a midnight funeral procession? I looked around. A woman next to me also saw the dropped shoe, her face immediately changing, and she quickly turned and pushed her way to the front. I suddenly felt a chill down my spine. The further we walked, the more shoes appeared. White sneakers, slender high heels, small leather shoes, tiger cub shoes. All were single shoes, all very clean, but they were all women's and children's shoes. The crowd began to murmur, pushing and walking faster. I clutched the rooster, carrying the wreath, gradually falling behind. The night was thick and cold. I hurried more, accidentally slipping my foot out of my shoe. Instinctively, I bent down to put it back on, but suddenly remembered the Daoist priest's words. If you drop a shoe, do not pick it up. I gritted my teeth, my stockinged foot stepping onto the cold ground. At that very moment, the rooster, whose comb I had squeezed until it bled and which had been silent until now, suddenly raised its neck and crowed mournfully. The rooster's crow startled me. I almost swallowed the half-piece of comb I was holding in my mouth. But then I remembered the Daoist priest's warning. I immediately clutched the rooster tightly, turned around, and ran. The moment I turned, right in front of me was my husband, holding my mother-in-law's ancestral tablet, followed by several people carrying funeral banners. Their faces looked at me strangely, slowly approaching. But I had clearly been at the end of the procession just a moment ago. How was I now at the front? The rooster in my arms raised its neck and let out another long cry. I glanced at the shoes scattered along the road. Gritting my teeth, I ran back, my feet unevenly shod. After a few steps, my remaining shod foot was violently yanked. I decisively kicked off the other shoe, running only in my stockings. As I was about to crash into the group ahead, I suddenly heard the creaking of the coffin ropes, as if they were about to snap. The 8 pallbearers were hunched over, the coffin almost dragging on the ground. In a panic, I instinctively glanced under the coffin. Below, my father-in-law was hanging upside down, his 4 limbs pointing skyward, clutching the bottom of the coffin, his head pressed against the wood as if gnawing on something. He turned his head and grinned at me. At the corner of his mouth appeared a long, black hairy mole, just like the matchmaker's mole. The entire group of pallbearers saw none of this ghostly scene, nor did my husband see me. I didn't know if this was the real funeral procession, an illusion, or just ghosts trying to scare me. I clenched my teeth, my tongue pushing the rooster comb further into my mouth. I tried to squeeze past the edge of the road, avoiding the funeral procession, intending to run backward. I walked right past my husband, who was holding the ancestral tablet. He was still looking straight ahead, but his eyes almost rolled to the side to glare at me. His gaze was vacant but also wildly insane. I pressed my lips together, daring not to answer, and tried to retreat. But as I passed the coffin, I heard a faint wailing sound again. I could only clutch the rooster, cover my ears, and stare at the ground as I walked. From the corner of my eye, I still saw many feet growing out from the bottom of the coffin. There were chubby infant feet, muddy children's feet, fair women's feet, and even painted toenails. All of them were not walking on their own but were being dragged along by the coffin. I was so scared I couldn't breathe, only wishing to pass this place quickly, but the more I feared, the more things happened. As I was about to pass the tail of the coffin, asterisk thwack, the left rope snapped, and the coffin immediately tilted towards me. The embankment was already narrow, there was no room to avoid the falling coffin. Just as I was about to be pushed into the field, a hand appeared from nowhere and yanked me away. The Daoist priest's voice rang out again. "Run!" I lunged forward, managed to avoid the falling coffin, and quickly continued to run. But my foot tripped on something, and I fell face down to the ground, the rooster and wreath flying away. My chin hit the ground hard, blood filled my mouth, and the half-piece of rooster comb also spilled out. I heard the Daoist priest sigh softly. When I looked up, what met my eyes were my own shoes, their toes pointing directly at me, neatly placed as if waiting for me to put them on. Ignoring the metallic taste of blood, I braced my hands to stand up but felt my arm being held tightly by someone. My husband pulled me up. "Anya, are you all right?" But wasn't he at the front? How did he appear at the back? My head suddenly spun in confusion. Behind me, panic screams erupted and the crowd surged and scattered. I didn't care, I just wanted to run with them. But Ethan's hand was like a vice, pulling me back strongly. "Anya, come here and help me." I staggered, being pulled to the overturned coffin. It was filled with torn sneakers, holey leather shoes, and filthy black children's shoes, reeking of a foul stench. They were piled on my mother-in-law's body. But from the moment she was interred until I guarded the Hall of Mourning, I was almost constantly present. How did this pile of shoes appear? The two pairs of shoes I remembered most. One was the black high-heeled shoe I saw when we turned onto the embankment. Now it looked dirty, its paint chipped and covered in mud. The other was the pink girl's shoe with two white pom-poms. Now the pom-poms were filthy, and the entire shoe was as black as if it had been soaked in mud for a long time. More terrifyingly, my father-in-law was still clutching the bottom of the coffin tightly, his mouth gnawing at the wood until the planks were chipped away. In the night wind, only his gnawing sound remained. The old Daoist priest, who should have remained calm, was now clutching a filthy high-heeled shoe, gnawing at it incessantly, tearing off the shoelace and chewing and swallowing it. The crowd had dispersed, now only the four of us remained. I looked at Ethan, my voice trembling. "What exactly is going on? What should we do now?" "Should we use chicken blood?" I looked around for the rooster. It was trembling, hiding in the grass. I grabbed it and squeezed its blood, intending to smear it on my father-in-law's and the old Daoist priest's foreheads. I handed the rooster to Ethan, motioning for him to do it. But he looked at the shoes behind my back, then turned to me, his voice stern. "Anya, you'll help me, won't you?" His gaze was exactly like when he forced me to guard the spirit altar. The deceased was his mother, and now his father and the Daoist priest were in trouble, yet he still only wanted to push me to the forefront. A gasp caught in my throat. I felt resentment and disgust. I walked back with the rooster, squeezing more blood. "I've helped twice already. This is the last time." I gathered all my courage and smeared chicken blood on the old Daoist priest's forehead. He startled awake, looked around, and then vomited repeatedly. I quickly did the same for my father-in-law, but it was useless. He continued to gnaw at the wood. I looked at Ethan for help. "What do we do now?" The old Daoist priest vomited black liquid mixed with shoe fragments. He coughed a few times, then looked at me suspiciously. "You've been awake all this time?" He pointed at the coffin. "What did you see just now?" I recounted everything. His face changed, then he looked at my husband. "She's still awake. Perhaps that's the only way out. You choose." "Choose what?" I looked at Ethan confused. Behind us, the children who picked up firecrackers reappeared. This time, they held hands, dancing and singing. Matchmaker, matchmaker, blind and reckless. Eyes gouged, teeth gone, nothing left to say. Ethan also looked behind him and whispered, "Anya, you saw them too?" I recalled that at the Hall of Mourning, it seemed only my father-in-law and I had seen these children. I turned to the Daoist priest, his face was grim. Ethan muttered, "No children means no heir. A wife can be remarried, but there must be children." His eyes became frantic and he screamed, "Anya, don't blame me. I'll burn plenty of paper money for you later." He lunged forward and covered my mouth and nose tightly. "Anya, my children will be your children too. They will offer incense and prayers for you. Without children, you will have no one to remember you. I'm doing this for you." I was dazed, then my vision blurred with blood. I saw the Daoist priest standing on the other side of the embankment, his face filled with sorrow. The children danced in the water, singing, "Self-inflicted karma, no regret." Killing wives for sons, adding more to the count. Deceiving daughters-in-law, no respect. Replacing wives for sons, piling up sins. Heaven has eyes, retribution comes. Nailing shoes, burying face down, seeking sons, retribution comes. I remembered that this entire village had not seen a child born for a long time. What I saw were the wronged souls of children who could not be reborn. But before I could think further, my head was struck hard. My consciousness, which had just gathered, immediately plunged into darkness. When I awoke again, I was already dressed in a burial shroud, lying in the coffin. My entire body was numb and stiff. I couldn't utter a sound. Right beside me lay my mother-in-law's body, face down, while Ethan was holding my foot, putting a tattered, scaly shoe on me. Seeing that I was awake, his eyes paused for a moment, then he still lowered his head and hammered a nail straight through the sole of my foot. Next, the person overseeing the burial preparations stepped up. This time, she held a bag of rice husks, signaling Ethan to pour them into my mouth. I wanted to struggle, but I couldn't move. My mouth was forced open. Ethan grabbed a handful of husks and poured them straight into my mouth, his voice trembling. "Anya, don't blame me. It's because you saw those children, saw those shoes and bare feet. Don't struggle either. The village vet injected you with anesthetic. You can't move. When you get to the other side, don't speak nonsense. You and my mother will suffer together, buried face down, so they agree to let the children reincarnate, preferably many sons." Husks poured into my mouth. I choked, feeling as if my nose, throat, and windpipe were all filled. I stared at Ethan, unable to believe it. He was afraid I would report him on the other side, so he grabbed more husks, stuffing my mouth full, even pressing his fist straight in. Wanting to gag me, yet wanting me to pray for children, wasn't that a contradiction? As my consciousness began to fade, I saw the Daoist priest who had given me the rooster, hanging upside down from the ceiling, his eyes filled with pity. "Do you remember now?" My mind was hazy, as if filled with husks, unable to remember. I could only look up at him, begging him to save me. But immediately after, the officiant held the artificial eyes and pressed them hard into my eyes. A red flash of light gleamed before my eyes. I was in so much pain I wanted to scream, but my mouth, full of husks, immediately sealed off my breath. Not even a groan could escape, only a burning sensation in my throat. At that very moment, I seemed to remember everything, but my body was flipped over, face down, just like my mother-in-law, buried in a position of atonement. One by one, tattered shoes were thrown onto me. Each time a shoe was thrown, someone muttered, "They've confessed their sins. Discard the old shoes, new ones arrive." The Holy Mother grants children. First flowers, then fruits. Sisters take care of their brothers. Best to have 2 sons and 1 daughter, a house full of descendants. The old, torn shoes struck my body and my memories flooded back. This village, that matchmaker. The children, the shoes, and the bare feet dragged by the coffin. When the coffin was full of shoes and the lid closed, I no longer felt suffocated by the husks, nor did I feel any pain. My body felt light. Small hands grasped mine, crying, "Holy Mother, Holy Mother." I opened my eyes. My eyes still ached, but I was not in the coffin. I was immersed in the river. Even though I remembered everything, the memories of being stuffed with husks and nailed still left a pain as fresh as ever. It was completely dark. Under the moonlight, the children surrounded me, their faces full of pity. "Holy Mother, we won't reincarnate anymore. We'll stay with you forever, never asking to leave again." Beside me was the young Daoist priest. No, he was the local earth god, Zhangju Fan. He looked at me with sorrow. "You've awakened. Let's begin." I caressed the children's faces, embracing each one, my feet gently kicking the water. In the middle of the river, the funeral shoes floated. Some found a shoe that belonged to them, some did not. Without shoes, they could not enter the mortal realm, proving they had never been born. Children's shoes were too few. The river was full of women's shoes. Dirty feet floated upstream, cleansed by the river water, becoming clean and beautiful. They put on the funeral shoes, standing silently in the water. Their eyes, with artificial eyeballs inserted, wore only one shoe, the other foot still bled. They were the girls killed by the villagers here. To prevent them from filing complaints in the underworld, they had inserted artificial eyes to blind them, used copper coins or rice husks to gag their tongues, and allowed them only one funeral shoe. The other shoe was an old shoe from when they were alive, nailed to their foot. 1 foot yin, 1 foot yang, unable to enter the underworld, nor return to the mortal realm. They were lured here by the matchmaker because this village had no daughters. Decades ago, whenever a girl was born, they would throw her into this river, so no girls grew up here. Those girls whose lives were cut short could not reincarnate, only drifting and wailing in the river. Zhangju Fan and I adopted them. Waiting for those who prayed for sons to grow up, unable to find wives, they would send the matchmaker to deceive girls from outside the village. They brought them back but never cherished them. Just a sweet word from the matchmaker, and they had a wife to do laundry, bear heirs, and even earn money to support the whole family. They died because they discovered they were tricked, because they sought to escape, committed suicide, or died painfully from forced childbirth, or died from forced abortions of girl babies. They were nailed to the foot, unable to enter reincarnation, only crying endlessly in the river. Zhang Jiu Fan and I protected them. But even if they had sons or bought sons from outside, children still frequently died sudden, untimely deaths. Or they were jealous of other families having children and secretly took action, or were engrossed in gambling, leaving children home to suffer accidents, or fell ill and were too stingy to pay for treatment, choosing to have another child instead. Each died for a different reason. Fearing the children's resentment, they also nailed shoes onto the children's corpses. This village committed too much evil. I couldn't bear to see more bodies floating on the river. The children who had not yet reincarnated, I restrained them from doing so. Even if they reincarnated, they would soon die unjustly and return. Better not to let them suffer further. But the unborn infants still yearned to be human. Zhang Jiu Fan and I made a wager with them. I would transform into a girl and marry into this village. If after 1 year I was not killed, and 2 years later I gave birth to a daughter, and that daughter lived to be 3 years old, and I still had not given birth to a son and was still alive, all of them would be allowed to reincarnate into the village. But after only half a year of marriage, the villagers, without children, blamed the matchmaker. They gouged out her eyes, pulled out her teeth, and forced her face down to atone for sins, to pray for children. Even though strange phenomena appeared at the funeral, they did not repent. They even wanted to kill me and bury me face down with her. During that time, Zhang Jiu Fan saved me several times, trying to keep a tiny hope alive for those children. But in the end, I saved the old Daoist priest, and he was ungrateful. I married a good husband. He would rather marry another wife than kill me for a son. Once evil thoughts are born, this village no longer needs to exist. My death was not beautiful either. The funeral took place in the middle of the night. The villagers still came in full attendance, just like last night, but this time more silently. Everyone's face was drained of blood, glancing left and right at the river banks, fearing the reappearance of those vengeful shoes. I stood in the water, looking through the coffin, seeing my body inside now just a paper effigy. It wasn't until we were about to cross the river that I gently waved to the wailing female ghosts and the unfulfilled infants. Good and evil end here. Find your own path to rebirth. Drowned souls, as long as they find a replacement, can reincarnate. Moreover, with Zhang Jiu Fan and I as guarantors, as long as there is a replacement, the gate of hell will open, and they will naturally enter reincarnation. I gently waved my hand, and the old shoes reappeared on the funeral path. But this time, these shoes were not laid out. They were for the wicked to step on themselves, to let them taste the pain of having their feet nailed. The first to taste it was, of course, my good husband. He still walked forward, expressionless, holding my mother-in-law's ancestral tablet. But the moment his foot touched the ground, the shoe on his foot transformed into the very shoe he had nailed to my foot, the nail piercing straight through the sole of his foot. "Ag!" The scream ripped through the night. He trembled violently, struggling desperately, trying to kick off the shoe. But how could a vengeful shoe be easily shaken off, especially when it was nailed? Hearing his scream, the villagers carrying the coffin threw down all their belongings in terror and turned to flee. But the road was full of nailed shoes, each finding the exact person who had committed the evil. Pitiful screams rang out repeatedly. They struggled, trying to pull out the nails, but couldn't. Some even endured the pain and tried to keep running. I led the ghosts floating along the river, watching them, wearing the nailed shoes, running away in pain and disarray. The crimes committed for so many years, how could they die quickly? They had to taste fear and bone-deep pain. When they were almost out of the riverbank, I led the ghosts to rise from the water. Connected by the vengeful shoes, they naturally saw us. Humans fear most the vengeful souls they owe, so in ghost stories, the most terrifying are always female ghosts and child spirits. Because deep down, they know who they have wronged. Amidst their panic screams, I gently waved my hand and the river rolled into currents, flooding their noses and mouths. Don't you villagers like to stuff husks and gag tongues? I have an entire river full of sand, I'll stuff that too. Anya, my good husband still tried to cover his mouth, trembling and begging. Husband and wife, so close I had no choice, please forgive me. As he spoke, he pushed the old Daoist priest down and pulled my body out of the coffin. I'll help you remove the nailed shoe, please forgive me. Oh, when he killed me, he claimed it was no choice. but when I sought revenge, he invoked marital affection. There is no such logic in this world. I smiled coldly, gently waving my hand. Round pebbles from the river flew up, falling into the hands of the female ghosts. Wrongs have their source, debts have their owners. After revenge, enter reincarnation. Don't suffer the pain of gouged eyes and nailed feet anymore. The female ghosts, sobbing, rushed towards the villagers who were choking on sand, gagging and vomiting it out. They wanted to run, but the pain from the nailed shoes held their feet firm. How could they run? Some cruelly chopped off their own feet to escape. But as soon as one foot was severed, the nailed shoe immediately transferred to the other foot. Let's see if they dare chop off both feet. And if they do, what will they run with? I held 2 pebbles, slowly walking towards my good husband. He was still about to beg, but I just waved my hand and the water turned into ropes, binding his limbs tightly. He clenched his mouth shut, but river sand still surged straight down his nose. He choked painfully, instinctively opening his mouth, only for even more muddy sand to pour in. He fell, his eyes looking at me with pleading mixed with hatred. I raised the 2 pebbles before him. None of you deserve to live in this world. Then I released my hand, and the pebbles, like blades, plunged straight into his eyes. He cried out in agony, but the sand and mud were relentless. His screams could not escape. Amidst the howling night wind, the villagers' tragic screams echoed, mixed with the joyful laughter of the female ghosts and child spirits, their hatred avenged. When all the wicked had drawn their last breath, a small boat glided upstream. Zhang Fan and I stepped aboard, bowing before Granny Meng, who sat cooking soup on the boat. She only sighed, waved her hand, and a warm mist emanated, instantly making the wounds from the nailed shoes and the artificial eyes of the female ghosts and child spirits disappear, restoring their original appearances. She merely looked at me, then waved her hand again, and the mist guided them onto the boat. Free from pain, they joyfully waved goodbye to me. Zhang Fan turned and said, "Let's begin our work. We've sent off the easy ones, now for the difficult ones." The souls of the villagers, still groaning in pain, drifted out. Zhang Fan and I exchanged glances and simultaneously waved our hands. Iron chains pierced through and bound their souls. The moment I struck, Zhang Fan had already swung his chain, binding my good husband's soul separately, his eyes showing profound resentment. "This one," he said, "I will personally oversee." The female ghosts and child spirits who had suffered the pain of being nailed would have it repaid 10-fold, 100-fold. They once wished for others to neither enter the underworld nor return to the mortal realm. So, Zhang Fan and I would ensure they would never be able to reincarnate as humans for all eternity.